Hello, everyone. Welcome to Barca News. It is April 2nd, 2025, and Mark Ter Stegen could end up playing the Champions League, but it would come at the cost of Wojciech Szczesny. Also, Victor Osimhen has offered himself to Barcelona, and finally, the club are considering signing a Panamanian young star. We have a lot to discuss, so let's begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the channel. My name is Mo, and I'm bringing you this short live because I'm currently out of the country. I'm not home. I'm not in my Barca, my YouTube studio. Therefore, I cannot be taping, editing, and uploading videos. So instead, I'm bringing you these short lives in order to keep you up to date on all Barcelona news. This is not a podcast, so unfortunately, I will not be addressing the comment section. But nonetheless, let's dive right into the news because, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Ter Stegen is very close to making a comeback. Our German goalkeeper, our captain, is ahead of schedule as far as his recovery. As you know, he has suffered a very serious injury at the beginning of the season. He had to undergo surgery on his knee. He is almost very, very close to being declared fit. In fact, as I reported in yesterday's video, he has started doing part of the group training with his team and his teammates. And as you know, group training is usually the last step in any player's recovery. So Ter Stegen is expected to come back before the end of the season, which of course the question is, would he be able to play the Champions League in case Barcelona do advance into the final stages, whether it be the semifinals or the final itself? And while the answer is yes, however, in order for Ter Stegen to play the Champions League, we would have to deregister Wojciech Szczesny from the Champions League. Why? Because Wojciech Szczesny was registered after the registration for the Champions League had been closed. He was registered in the place of Ter Stegen because Ter Stegen is injured, right? There was a special rule in the Champions League that when you have two goalkeepers and one of them gets injured, you can register as an emergency a replacement for that goalkeeper that gets injured. That's exactly what happened here. We had Ter Stegen and Iñaki Peña both registered with UEFA. When Ter Stegen got injured, under that rule, we were allowed to register Wojciech Szczesny in his place. Now, in order to re-register Ter Stegen in the Champions League, under the rule, you have to remove the registration of the goalkeeper that replaced your injured goalkeeper once your goalkeeper is healthy once again. So yes, Ter Stegen can play in the Champions League, but we would have to deregister Wojciech Szczesny from the Champions League. That would not affect La Liga or the Copa del Rey. And of course, my question to you is, would you deregister Wojciech Szczesny to register Ter Stegen? For me, the answer is pretty easy. Ter Stegen is our best goalkeeper. If he can, be fit and be at top of his form, I'm all for it. Anyways, next bit of news, because ladies and gentlemen, Victor Osimhen has been offered to Barcelona. Now, as you know, Barcelona are in the market looking for replacements for Robert Lewandowski, not this summer, next summer. But nonetheless, they're still scouting the market to see who they can sign once Lewandowski leaves the club or decides to hang his boots. And as such, Osimhen's representative have offered the player to Barcelona. Now, the 26-year-old Nigerian center forward is currently on loan with Galatasaray. And in the summer, when he goes back to Napoli, he's expected to, of course, join another club. So they've offered him to Barca. What's the problem? As well, is he has a pretty high release clause worth 75 million euros. They're saying it is negotiable, but nonetheless, it's still pretty high. And on top of that, Osimhen is going to want a very, very high salary. So despite the player being offered to the club, I don't see the signing happening. High salary, high transfer fee just makes it very difficult for Barcelona given the current financial situation. Now, we know we also have Blahovic, who's also been offered to Barcelona. His transfer fee would be a little bit cheaper, but he would also need a high salary. Again, Barcelona cannot afford that, especially with our financial fair play. Then there is Lookman. We talked about Lookman in the past. It seemed like it would be an affordable option, 25 to 30 million euros. But as I reported in a previous video, now that Atalanta have received so much interest for the player, they've decided that they're going to extend his contract by one more year from 26 until 2027, and then charge 70 to 75 million euros, which also makes him a very expensive option. So that, of course, is pricing Barcelona out of many, many options, which brings us to the next player, who is Nico Williams, because it seems that Barcelona are now trying to convince Deco that Nico Williams would be the best option to reinforce Barcelona's attack. Now, as we know, Nico's number one option is Luis Diaz. However, Luis Diaz is going to cost a lot of money, 70 to 75 million euros. That's what Liverpool would want. And Luis Diaz is 28 years old. And Barcelona are trying to convince Deco that, look, if we're going to make a big investment into an attacker, we prefer it be someone younger, someone who can be at Barcelona for a longer period of time. So they prefer, of course, Nico Williams. Not only is Nico Williams cheaper than Luis Diaz, 58 million euros versus Luis Diaz 75. He, of course, is much younger, so he can be at Barcelona long term. So Barcelona prefer to make a big investment into a younger player that can be at the club for a longer period of time. Not to mention, Nico Williams is younger. He's not going to have a problem being Rafinha's substitute. Luis Diaz, he's not going to come to Barcelona to be Rafinha's substitute. He's not going to come to Barcelona to be anyone's substitute. So, of course, Nico Williams there also wins. So Barcelona trying to convince Deco, hey, man, maybe Luis Diaz wouldn't be the best option. Let's look at Nico Williams. And, of course, that was my biggest complaint when we were talking about Luis Diaz. It was his age. Not that he's old, but he's 28 years old. He's the same age as Rafinha. Doesn't make sense to have two wingers the same age, because they're both going to age at the same time, and you're going to end up having to replace both of them at the same time. The best thing to do is bring someone younger. So when Rafinha's old, that person who's younger can take the place of Rafinha. Now, speaking of young players, we will end today's video with the news that Barcelona are now trying to sign and very interested to sign a Panamanian star by the name Edward Cedeño. Now, if you haven't heard of Edward Cedeño, I hadn't. He's a 21-year-old defensive midfielder. He has been on loan with Tarazona in the third division, and he has been impressive in the third division, so much so that Tarazona have decided to activate the option to buy the player worth 350,000 euros. Now, Barcelona have been tracking Edward Cedeño for quite some time. They've been very impressed with his performance, and in fact, he put on a stellar performance against Barca Athletic. And given his great performances, Barcelona are now interested in signing him for Barca Athletic to reinforce the team, who, of course, have been struggling, especially after losing so many stars. And we're going to lose even more because Pau Prim has decided not to renew his contract. He's leaving in the summer. He's joining Al Sadd in Qatar. And, of course, Barcelona have decided that Edward Cedeño would be the perfect replacement for Pau Prim for Barca Athletic. Once Tarazona activate that option to buy for 350,000 euros, it's expected that Barcelona will then approach Tarazona to try to sign the player for Barca Athletic to replace Pau Prim, to reinforce the second team. And who knows, we'll see whether if he ends up adapting and maybe impressing, maybe one day he can play on the first team. Anyways, that is all the news for today. I did go live a few moments ago. If you haven't seen that video yet, make sure you do. I'm going to go to sleep because I have to be up at 4 a.m. to watch the Barcelona Atletico Madrid match. Yes, this time difference between Japan and the U.S. is insane. I can't imagine being a Barca fan living in Japan because all the time of the matches have been crazy. But nonetheless, I'll be there watching. And I might do a post-match live analysis. We'll see how sleepy I am in the morning. Anyways, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment. And as always,